Hey everyone, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode from the Luthier's Workbench. In this episode, I'm going to give you a couple of updates on some of the projects I've been working on, which includes the Green Dragon guitar and my CNC project. And then I'm going to do a review of a new soldering station, which I have brought in to the assembly facility here on the sprawling Highline Guitars campus located at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So let's take it out of neutral, throw it into first gear, and dump the clutch. Okay, as far as the update on the Green Dragon guitar is concerned, it's done. And the specs on it are, it's a mahogany body with a flame maple top that features an inlay of the Green Dragon here on the lower bout. And then up here on the upper horn, I have, this is the Chinese character for the word strength. So it's all gold hardware. I've got a Kluson bridge, Kluson tuners, and a gold three-way switch, and a gold. This is a concentric pot. Now here's a tip for you. If you're tight for space on your controls, or you don't want to take away from the some of the figured wood that you might be using for the top, you might want to consider using a concentric pot. A concentric pot is basically two pots in one. So you have a lower knob and an upper knob, and the upper knob, in this case, the upper knob controls the tone, and the lower knob will control the volume. So that'll just save you a little bit of space. Now, of course, this one is a 500K value pot, so you just need to make sure that when you use one of these that you get the knobs that will fit it. These are concentric knobs. So the neck is on this guitar is flame maple. The fretboard is Chechen rosewood, which comes out of Central America, and it has about the same hardness as East Indian rosewood. It's not quite as hard as ebony, but works really well for a fretboard. It has great looking grain, takes stain very nicely. The neck shaft is flame maple. I typically don't use flame maple on guitar necks because flame maple has a tendency to move a lot, and the only times I'll ever use flame maple is if I happen to come across a board which has the grain running as close to quarter sawn as possible, and it appears to be completely dry and absolutely straight, and that's the only time I'll ever consider using flame maple. And I've mentioned that before. In fact, I had a question from a viewer about whether or not I would ever consider using carbon fiber rods to try to keep the neck stable, and I've done that before. And I'll be honest with you, if wood is going to move, it's going to move. And it doesn't matter whether you've got, 5, 6, 7 piece laminated neck or carbon fiber strips. If it's going to move, it's going to move, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. So I don't really waste time with doing carbon fiber stiffening or any of that kind of stuff. It's just it's an extra step that costs more money and doesn't really accomplish anything, so I just don't bother with it. And then if you'll remember, when I installed the frets on this guitar, I was using Cintam's Bell Bronze fret wire. And I had a question the other day, what is my feeling about this fret wire right now, having installed it? And really, all I can speak to is how easy it was to work with, and how it's, maybe a little bit about how it sounds and what the sustain is going to be like with it. But as far as like longevity, I don't really know yet. I can only go by what the manufacturer says, and they've told me that this fret wire will last longer than nickel silver, and but it's because it wasn't as hard to work with as like stainless steel is. I've got to figure its lifespan is going to be somewhere between nickel silver and stainless steel, so that's a good thing. And of course, what it really comes down to, I think, is how it sounds. And what the sustain is like. Now, in terms of tone, again, I can't really go speak to that, because the only way I could compare it would be if I were to play the guitar with this fret wire and record it, and then replace the fret wire with nickel silver and maybe stainless steel, and then play it again to see what the difference would be, because there's too many variables in terms of tone on a guitar that it's impossible to say, well, compared to the other guitars I've built that use stainless steel, this is how it sounds. I just don't think that that's an accurate way to gauge it. So what I can say is, in tuning this guitar and getting it set up, the initial setup, I really couldn't tell a significant difference in tone with the bell bronze fret wire and nickel silver. It sounds very close to me. And stainless steel is a different story. Stainless steel to me has a much sharper, brighter attack, and because of that, some people love it and some people hate it. But it definitely sounds, I think, closer to what a nickel silver fret wire sounds like. So in terms of sustain, I really feel like it has some very good sustain. I was really surprised. Now, I'm not going to play, because remember, I'm a left-handed guitar player and this is a right-handed guitar, so, but has a nice bell-like ring to it. And now remember, the sound is coming out of my little tube amplifier and it's going right into my lapel mic, so I'm not in a studio with really high-end recording equipment. You already know my feeling about recording audio samples, so yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. Sounds like an electric guitar. So if you're thinking about giving some bell bronze fret wire a try, I highly recommend it. If you're in the business of building guitars, one of the things you have to do is find a way to differentiate yourself from what everybody else is doing. And this is just one of the things that you could do to separate yourself from the pack, is to try the bell bronze fret wire. So I'll have a link down in the description below to my Amazon store, so you can go in and check out that wire. Symptoms also has a wide range of other fret wire, including a couple of different formulations of nickel silver, titanium, which I will be testing in a future guitar build, but that's probably not going to come until maybe late this spring, early summer. So yeah, that's kind of where it stands right now. Okay, as far as my CNC project is concerned, I've ordered all the components for the mechanical structure, and I made a concerted effort to try and source as many of those parts domestically as I could. And by domestic, I mean here in the United States. And I did that obviously not for price reason, but mainly just for shipping reasons. I wanted stuff to get here faster, and I knew that if I was to order everything from China, it would take weeks and weeks to get here. And so far, like I said, everything is coming domestically with the exception of the SBR linear rails. And what I've received so far is this is the X-axis linear rail. This is an SBR 16. It's 700 millimeters wide, and it'll have 2 bearing blocks on it, and I've got those blocks as well. They just simply slide on like that. And I've also received the rails, the linear rails for the Z-axis, and these are SBR 12s, or at least they're supposed to be SBR 12s. When I received the order, one of them is an SBR 12, the other is an SBR 13, which won't work. Fortunately, the retailer was nice enough to admit their mistake, and they have shipped out a correct SBR 12, which will hopefully be here in a couple of weeks. And that's just an example of how long it takes to get stuff shipped from China here. Fortunately, that's not a big deal, because I don't need to use these SBR 12 Z-axis rails until the very end of assembling the mechanical structure. So by the time I get to that stage, I should have all the rails. And the rails for the y-axis are still in the process of being shipped here, and hopefully they should be here in the next week or two. And once I get those, I can really forge ahead with assembling the mechanical structure. Now, one thing I have decided to do with this CNC design is, because I know there are a lot of folks out there who are going to want to set up plans for this machine once it's done, I decided that I was going to offer two options. One is you'll be able to assemble this using end plates made out of aluminum. The other version will allow you to build it with end plates that are made from 18 millimeter thick, 12 ply Baltic birch plywood. And that's actually how I'm going to build the machine initially. And the reason I'm doing this is because I know that a lot of guys out there don't have the tools that will allow them to cut and drill 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick aluminum plate. Now, people will tell you, well, you can use woodworking tools to do that sort of work, but when you're talking about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick plate, you're really pushing it as far as what you're going to be subjecting your tools to. So my idea was I would provide the option of using Baltic birch, and then that way you could build the machine using the Baltic birch plates, and then if you really wanted aluminum, you could then use the machine itself to cut and drill your 1/2 inch thick aluminum plates at a later time. So I'll have both options that you can choose from with the plans. So, but that's going to come later down the road. First, I got to get this thing finished, and hopefully in the next couple of days I can begin assembling the mechanical structure. And then once that's done, I can weigh some of those components in order to determine the size stepper motors, and then I'll move ahead with that. And the goal is to have this machine up and running by late spring, early summer. So we'll see how that goes. But it's moving along pretty well right now, and it's just a matter of hurry up and wait. So. When it comes to wiring the electronics in my guitars, for years I've been using two different soldering irons. Both are made by Weller. One is a 25 watt and the other is a 40 watt, and they're used specifically for different situations. For example, if I'm going to put solder on the back of a pot to hold the ground wires, I'll use the 40 watt because all I have to do is just touch it to the surface, deposit the solder, and it's good to go. I don't have to linger too long, and that can cause damage to the delicate internal components. But when I'm ready to start connecting wires to the lugs as well as wire up the switches, the jack, and all that, I'll use my 25 watt because I don't need that much heat, and that reduces the risk of damaging the components as I'm soldering them. The advantage of using the Wellers is they're readily available just about everywhere. Any hardware store, any craft store, you'll find the Wellers, and they also usually will carry a supply of different kinds of tips that you can use with it. So you don't have to worry about ordering stuff online and waiting for it to come before you can solder up your guitar. You can just run to the hardware store and pick up what you need. And this 25 watts kind of cool because it's got LEDs that help light up the area you're working in. The disadvantage is these two soldering irons take a fairly significant amount of time to heat up. And that's a problem for me because when I'm wiring a guitar, I'll wire up the circuit, and then I like to plug the guitar into my amp and test that circuit to see if it's doing what I expect it to do. And that's something that happens frequently because oftentimes I'm wiring up some unique and creative wiring scenarios. And you can look at a wiring diagram and get an idea of how it's going to function, but I always like to double check it and by plugging it into the amp. But the problem is, if my soldering iron is plugged in at the same time, the soldering iron generates a huge amount of electromagnetic interference, and I get just an incredible amount of noise coming out of the amplifier, out of the speaker. So I have to unplug the soldering iron before I plug in the guitar. And then if I need to make any changes to the soldering, to my wiring, I have to unplug the guitar and plug the soldering iron back in. And that would all be well and good, except it takes so long for the soldering iron to heat up. So I have these gaps of, 10, 15 minutes waiting for it to heat up. And if you're like me, half the time you're waiting for something to heat up, you forget what it is you were going to be doing anyway. So recently, though, I came across a soldering station that really grabbed my attention because of the price. And according to the reviews, people were saying that it heats up super, super fast. So obviously I had to check this thing out. So let me show you what this is. This is the Sealody SSA 51 soldering station. And I picked this up on Amazon. I think I paid like less than $50 for the thing and got free shipping too. But it's a really nice tool. I was very surprised. And what you get basically is this controller box, which is how you adjust and regulate the control of the soldering iron itself. And it says on the front of it, lead-free soldering station. I think that may confuse some people. They're going to assume that the only thing you can use this with is lead-free solder, and that's not the case at all. In fact, all I use is regular lead solder. But I think what they're trying to infer is that the feature of being able to adjust the temperature precisely makes it ideal for use with lead-free solder, because when you're using lead-free solder, if you've ever used it before, you'll know that you have to get the temperature at a very specific point, and that's a fairly narrow window, in order for the solder to melt and flow properly. It's not anywhere near as forgiving as regular lead solder. So you have that ability to adjust the temperature from 0 degrees all the way up to, I think it goes as high as 450 degrees. And I have it set at 400, which seems to be a good temperature to work with when soldering the electronics. So, but the thing I like the most about this soldering iron is this. The power switch is on the side. It shows the temperature it's set at, and then it begins to raise the temperature of the iron itself. And that is basically how quickly it warms up the soldering iron. It only takes a few seconds. And that is so important to me, because now I've got a soldering iron that I can solder up the electronics, I can shut it off, test the guitar, and if I need to make any changes, I can switch the soldering iron back on, and it's instantly ready to solder. I don't have to sit there and wait and then forget what it was I was doing. So as you can see, it is very quick at heating up. And as far as the quality of this product, this whole stand is cast metal. It's very durable, very sturdy, and you got a place to put a sponge and some water. And it's got this, I don't know, it's like brass steel wool type stuff in here that you can use to keep the tip clean. And 2 buttons on the front. One sets the temperature, it raises the temperature. The other one lowers it. And then the on-off switch is on the side. It's a very good quality product. So if you're looking for a soldering station, to do all your guitar wiring, and you want something that's going to heat up super fast, something that you could use lead-free solder with, and you don't want to spend an arm and a leg, which you shouldn't, because let's face it, a guitar circuit is one of the simplest circuits you'll ever solder. It's not like you're soldering components onto a computer motherboard. So you don't need to spend a huge amount of money for a soldering station. You just need a basic unit, and this one fills that need pretty well. So